It's a wonderful day for us. It's a blessed day for us to listen to an what was educated or research mind, still researching, still writing, still thinking. Such a wonderful person is with us to guide us, to give motivation to us in the field of literature. Uh, Thanks for his presence here. I first of all request our Dr. Krishnamurthy sir to give a welcome speech.
Very good morning to one and all present here. First of all, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our chief guest, Professor P. MARUDANAYAGAM. And I welcome our principal, K.R. Venkatesan of our college. Then all HODs, faculty members, and my dear students, all are most welcome to this session. Thank you.
So I request our principal sir to honor our guest with a memento. Thank you, sir. Now I request our principal sir to say a few words about the session.
Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Most esteemed and respected Professor Dr. MARUDANAYAGAM, who has inspired thousands and thousands of students, scholars and administrators, not only in Tamil, but also in English, not only in English and Tamil, but also of various other languages, not only in India and Tamil Nadu, but across the country and across the world. A person from whom we have to get the scholars and students and teachers, and even an ordinary human being should get motivation, inspiration, and how we have to live in this world in a simple and humble way. Even though he was such a scholarly person, how we have to live in this world. Vidya datati vinayam, vinayat dhyati patratam is the saying. So he has inspired so many students, and we cherish the memories of his teaching in Pondicherry University while we were his students. And he used to teach almost all the subjects. He didn't bother about time, and we even go to his residence even after completing the class hours, and we sit under him, and he would be speaking hours together about Shakespeare, Milton, about all the literary characters and caricatures. And we were totally inspired by him. We are speechless as I have told you yesterday, whether inside the class or outside the class, he is a class apart. So he was able to become the director of the Center of Classical Tamil of not only Pondicherry but also Chennai, and he was instrumental in bringing the Center for Classical Tamil, which is now decorated with a lot of books, with a new building, with new amenities, with new infrastructural facilities. Everything is there in the library, in the center. We even collected all the students of our college, particularly the Department of Tamil and English, and we visited the center with all the students. We spent one full day in the center, and one day is not enough, and one life actually is not enough to listen to him. So such a great opportunity we have got. You have got, you young students, you have got that opportunity. He has voluntarily come forward to give the lecture. He was about to give the graduation day address yesterday, and out of his own interest in meeting the students and faculty members and research scholars also are here. It's a great opportunity to listen to him. And I have great pleasure in welcoming you, sir. Please bless us and guide us in all our endeavors, and continue to motivate all of us through your inspiring words, talks, and speech. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sir is going to speak on epic similes in Homer, Milton, and the Sangam poets. And he has also brought the books written by him. He has written a lot of books, hundreds and hundreds of books he has written out of his own personal research. And he has donated many books to our college, and still he is donating books. Even today also he is donating all these books. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Right. Respected principal and my dear friends, I am most happy to be here to deliver a couple of lectures. And for this opportunity, I am thankful, of course, to the principal, to the Department of English, and to the Department of Tamil, headed by Professor Radhakrishna. My first lecture will be on the employment of epic similes in Homer, Milton, and the Sangam poets. My second lecture will be in Tamil on Kamban, the greatest of epic poets. Now about the similes, various opinions have been expressed about the similes by great scholar poets and distinguished critics. For instance, Coleridge, who is known for his, not only for his poems, but also for his theoretical, critical expositions about English literature in his works like Biographia Literaria and a series of lectures on Shakespeare, which he is reported to have delivered when he was alive. Now, in his Biographia Literaria, as many of you may know, he makes a distinction between primary imagination and secondary imagination, and also a distinction between imagination and fancy. Now, his poetic theory, his views on poetics are remarkable. As I said, he is the best of critics in Western, so far as Western literature is concerned. And he says, similes should not be simply ornamental. A simile should become an integral part of a poem. An integral part of a poem. A poem he conceives as an organic whole. That is, a poem has a life of its own. Uirthuvam, udayadu kavidai. That's what he says. And the simile shouldn't be simply an ornament. That will be an inferior kind of poetry. It should be an integral part, an essential part of a poem. And our own Tolkappiyar, perhaps he has got the greatest poetic theory in his Puducherry. In two of the chapters of Puducherry, that is Seyyuliyal and Uvamayal, he speaks about the similes. He says the simile is not an essential member of a poem. He also conceives of a poem as an organic whole with its own life. And he mentions about 30 limbs of a poem, 30 members of a poem, 30 உறுப்புகள். He says, he uses the word, ஒரு கவிதையின் உறுப்புகள், members, limbs of a poem, as though it were a body with a life of its own. And he says, similes need not be, that is a great poem, doesn't need a simile. That's what he says. But in Uvamayal, he speaks about the simile alone, not the other figures of speech. He knows there are a number of figures of speech, anigal, and figures of speech. The Greeks and the Romans were highly interested in the figures of speech. They developed, the ancient Greek critics and poets, they developed a theory of poetry in which the rhetoric is important. They called the subject rhetoric, These are all rhetorical parts of a poem, and then they mention various figures of speech. Latin got its figures of speech only from Greek, English got all its figures of speech only from Greek. So, as I said, for oratorical purposes, they developed this rhetoric, for oratorical, for speaking, on the stage, for orators, not for poets. Originally, this subject known as rhetoric was developed for the benefit of orators. Oratory was given so much of importance in ancient Greece. Orators would become great leaders, politicians. Most of the politicians were very great orators. You know about Antony, and from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Antony was a great orator, and Caesar was also a great orator. They were great soldiers as well as orators. That is how they could become leaders, kings of Greece or one of the Greek islands or of Rome. And so this is an oratorical device, a strategy required by oratory. But our Tolyapia says, he speaks of similes alone, not about the other figures of speech, because they thought, our ancient poets and the critics thought, that all the other figures of speech which were later developed are artificial. Artificial. They are not natural. Even similes are artificial according to them. And this is justified. This stand of Tolyapia is justified by one of the commentators on Tolyapiyam. That is for Puruladigaram, for 4 chapters, we have got the commentary of a great commentator called Perasiriyar. His name was Perasiriyar. He was the only Perasiriyar, worth taking into account. That is what our ancestors felt. So they called him simply Perasiriyar. We don't know his natural name, the name that was given to him. Just as we don't know the name of Tolyapia, we don't know the real name of Thiruvalluvar, we don't know the names. Sembulappayal Neerar, Aniladu Mundilar, Mundrilar, Sangam poets. A number of Sangam poets are known by the similes they used. Similes were given so much of importance. The Sembulappayal Neer, Aniladu Mundril, all these are similes used by those great poets. We don't know their real names. And so they knew the importance of the simile in a poem. Now, yes, what about the aims of a simile? Dr. Johnson, remember, he is another great critic who has spoken so well and so much about poetry, Dr. Johnson. He is perhaps, according to many, he is the greatest of Western critics, excepting Coleridge, of course. And Dr. Johnson says the twin aims of a simile are illustration and ornamentation. Illustration and ornamentation. That is, the subject should be made clear by this illustration, by this comparison. There should be clarification about the subject. We call them subject and simile, Upamanam and Upameyam in Sanskrit. Upamana Kalidasa, Kalidasa was known for his similes, for the best of his similes in his epics and dramas. Kalidasa. And he says, ornamentation and illustration. These are the 2 aims of a simile. Ornamentation, that is giving beauty to the subject. beautifying the subject, and illustration, of course. Now, our own critic, one Yelamburanar, 1,000 years earlier, 1,000 years earlier than Dr. Johnson, he says, he also speaks about the aims of a simile. He says, புலனல்லாதன புலனாக்கலும் அலங்காரமாகி கேட்டார்க்கு இன்பம் பயத்தலும். He says, புலனல்லாதன புலனாக்கலும். What is not clear is made clear by the simile. புலன் அல்லாதன புலனாக்கலும் கேட்டார்க்கு, அலங்காரமாகி, it becomes an ornament. Alangaram is ani, அணிகலன். அலங்காரமாகி கேட்டார்க்கு இன்பம் பயத்தலும். It should give pleasure. So, illustration and ornamentation, they were recognized as the aims of a simile, as I said by another commentator on Tolkappiyam, that is Elamburanar. He has written his commentary on all the three parts of Tolkappiyam. He is supposed to be the earliest of the Tamil commentators. So, these are the different views of a simile regarding the nature of a simile and the function of a simile. Varied opinions, as I said, have been expressed now. And about Coleridge, he says, making a distinction between imagination and fancy. All human beings possess what he calls primary imagination. Poets alone are endowed with what is called secondary imagination, which is superior to primary imagination. Great poems are products of secondary imagination. Poems employing cheap tricks, cheap tricks like puns, and other cheap devices, words, word play, all kinds of word play. Poems which employ such kinds of devices, artificial devices, are, he says, products of fancy, an inferior kind of imagination. Remember in Tamil, our Puducherry, we are, of course, fascinated by Puducherry, our new poems, what are called Purachi Puducherry, but most of them, are products of fancy, an inferior kind of imagination, because they employ all these types of cheap tricks, wordplay. How to identify products of fancy? How to distinguish between products of fancy and the products of genuine imagination? How to distinguish between them? See, if it is a great poem, if it is a classic, if it is a masterpiece, you can go back to it any number of times. You won't be tired of going through them. That is, you can read them anywhere, at any time, and like that. So remember, Bharati's poems, you can read them any number of times. You are not going to be tired of those poems, remember. Bharati's poems. You can, while you are traveling by bus, traveling in train, while you are even walking on the road, you can go through them. And a second time, a third time, a fourth time, during your life. That is the identification of a genuine poem. Whereas, remember, most of these Puducherry, these Purachi revolutionary poems, you can't go through them a second time or a third time. There is a twist at the end of the poem. There may be such a twist. As I said, the entire poem will depend upon some kind of word play. For example, நள்ளிரவில் வாங்கினோம் இன்னும் விடியவில்லை. They will praise this poem to the skies, the champions of Puducherry. But then it is only a verbal cartoon, a tunukku. It is a tunukku. It's not a poem. A tunukku, a verbal cartoon, a cartoon in words, not in a picture, but in words. Such poems, now this, if you read it once, it is enough, You are not going to enjoy it going through a second time, going through it a second time or a third time, And first, if you have first heard about it, yeah, you enjoy it, of course, but later it's only a tunukku. So he says they are all products of fancy, inferior kind of imagination. So now let us examine the similes employed by Homer, Milton, and our own Sangam poets. See, I have got a handout because you may not be able to follow the lecture closely if you don't have this handout. You listen to me, but then for long passages which are quoted, you can refer to the handout. You can take it home and read it leisurely, even if you are not able to understand some of the points stressed here. When you read it closely at home, you will be able to understand them. That is the purpose of this handout. You can one copy each. If the copies are not sufficient, 2 or 3 may use a copy. Even if you don't have a copy, you listen to me and then you will be able to understand. If in the 18th century, I'm reading it, Johnson said that illustration and ornamentation are the 2 functions of a simile, more than 8 centuries later, perhaps 1,000 years earlier, more than 8,000 centuries earlier, Elamburanar, one of the celebrated commentators on Tulgapyam, had observed that a simile must clarify what is not evident and please the hearer by being an object of beauty. That is what I said. No pulanalladana pulanakkalum alangaramahi kettarki inbam payathan. It is now emphasized in the West that the images used by a poet should be functional and drawn from life, not that, That is from real situations, from common happenings in life, similes should be drawn. Poets, should be able to take similes from real life situations. Then only they will be able to appeal to the readers, to the audience. Shakespeare is praised for using such images and avoiding bookish ones. Milton is known for bookish similes, The fact that bear baiting, a common Elizabethan sport, was used effectively by Shakespeare and not by any of his learned contemporaries like Ben Jonson or Marlowe, is said to testify to his poetic genius. That is, bear baiting was a common Elizabethan sport. That is, the animal bear would be tied to a post and several dogs would be set at it, and they will be biting the bear, They will be troubling the bear all the time. It will be a painful experience, the most painful experience to the bear. But the Elizabethan audience would be pleased by that sight, They were such cruel-hearted people. They even would go to the mad houses where the mad fellows, would be kept and enjoy, the sight of the mad fellows doing all kinds of funny things. They were so cruel-hearted. This bear baiting, such a common experience in the life of an Elizabethan, is used as a simile by Shakespeare. For example, in his 12th Night, he uses this simile. This character, the funny character there, the comic character, what is his name? Is it more? That is, Satobi Belch and others, enjoy the company of this fellow, Sir Andrew Aguch. Malvalio. Malvalio is a character in 12th Night, and he is teased by a number of minor characters in the play. And he is compared to the bear baited by several dogs by Shakespeare. This would have appealed immediately to the Elizabethan audience. Whereas such experiences, such real life situations were not used as similes by the other learned contemporaries of Shakespeare. Shakespeare was not a university graduate. He didn't have any higher education, He might have studied up to the 5th or 6th standard, He knew little Greek and less Latin. That is what Dr. Johnson says about Shakespeare. He knew little Greek and less Latin. But whereas the other playwrights like Marlowe, Ben Jonson, they were all great scholars. They Lilly, Peel, and Green, and as I said, Marlowe and Ben Jonson. They were known as university wits. They all lived during Shakespeare's time, but their dramas were not so successful as Shakespeare's dramas, even though they were great scholars. Shakespeare could exploit such life situations, such common experiences of the Elizabethans. He could observe so close. A poet should have the power of observation and the power of meditation. That's what Coleridge says. The power of observation, closely observing life, meditating upon that, and giving expression to it, giving poetic expression to it. This is what Shakespeare possessed. So that is about the importance of natural images, natural similes drawn from life, as opposed to the artificial ones, the bookish ones. Milton is condemned for his lack of visual imagination, and Shelley for preferring abstract images to concrete ones. See this. Milton condemned for his visual imagination, lack of visual imagination. That is, Eliot speaks of visual imagination and auditory imagination. Auditory, visual, auditory. That is, an image should appeal to the five senses, one or two or more of the five senses, So they are categorized as images of, these five senses. And visual imagination, you have the power to appeal to the eye, then visual imagination. You have the power to appeal to the ear, that is auditory imagination. He says, Eliot complains that Milton possessed only auditory imagination. That is, the rhythm of his poetry, the rhythm of his verses, Sangam, that appeals to the reader or to the listener easily. He is able to appeal to the auditory imagination because of the beautiful rhythm that he is able to produce in his Paradise Lost. But he lacks visual imagination. That is very unfortunate because Milton became totally blind before he wrote Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and Samson agonist is in his 40s. When he was in his 40s, even then he had lost his eyesight completely. But he refused to give up, And he tried to justify the ways of God to man. Remember, he suffered so much in life, in his private life, he suffered so much. He had to court house arrest because he spoke against monarchy. He had the courage to speak about against monarchy when there was a monarchy in Britain. And there was a king, he could speak against, that. Remember what the contemporary poets and what our own poets and scholars, intellectuals are doing now, praising the ruling party all the time and getting all the benefits, never having the courage to work against. Bharati had that courage, but not the present poets. He courted arrest. He didn't mind it. But then that's a different matter. Milton had that courage to speak. That is terrible, Speaking against the governments now may not be so dangerous as speaking against monarchy during his time. He did it. And he suffered on account of that. He was, as I said, he was kept under house arrest, during his old age when he had become blind, and he had to be taken care of by his two daughters and by his two young daughters who were unwilling to help this old man, blind old man. But then he was bent upon justifying the ways of God to man. The sin committed by Adam and Eve and the punishment, of God. He justifies that in spite of a very unpleasant private life of his own. So, yes, this Milton unfortunately became blind when he was in his 40s, and so he had to depend upon books. Even nature, he couldn't appreciate the beauty of nature because he lacked eyesight, and he saw nature through the spectacles of books. That is what one critic says. He couldn't see it by his own eyes, but through the spectacle of books. Books had to serve as his spectacles, pair of spectacles. So that is how he could see nature. And so you can't expect from him beautiful descriptions of the sights and sounds of nature. It is very unfortunate. But then he couldn't help it. And so this man, this critic says he lacked visual imagination. And so his poetry doesn't appeal to the eye. There are no visual images in his poems, no visual similes in his poems, like those that you get in Shakespeare or in other English poets or in our own Tamil poets. Our Sangam poets could observe nature closely, study nature so closely. And they have come out with such a beautiful similes about, all drawn from nature. Kabila had so much of knowledge of nature, such a close knowledge of nature about the animals, about the plants. I will come back to it later. So this is about Milton. And Shelley for preferring abstract images to concrete ones. Shelley was a great poet, no doubt about it. But when compared to Keats, the poetry of Shelley is inferior to the poetry of Keats. Why? Because of this reason. Keats didn't have much of higher education. He commits even ordinary spelling mistakes. When we go through his manuscripts, we come across certain funny mistakes in spelling and grammar. He didn't have a very sound knowledge of English, because he lacked, as I said, higher education. Whereas Shelley was a great scholar. He knew his Greek and Latin. He had gone through Plato, Aristotle, and others. He had even translated a chapter from Plato's dialogues. He was such a great scholar. But then, if his poetry is inferior to the poetry of Keats, it is because of this reason. That is, he uses only abstract images, not concrete ones. Parupporul and nunporul in objects. Real objects are parupporul. Ideas are abstract notions. Abstract notions. So, this description of abstract ideas and the similes based on abstract notions you come across in plenty in Shelley, but not in Keats. Keats could observe life and nature closely and could come out with similes, images that can appeal to our visual imagination. That is why Keats is preferred to Shelley. Creating one powerful image is to Ezra Pound more praiseworthy than writing hundreds of melodious lines of meaningless words. This Ezra Pound was the author of the theory called imagism. Imagism. He spoke of imagism, objectivism, and whatism in detail. We are not bothered about those things. This imagism, that is, he says, an image means, also similes, metaphors, images, symbols, what we call, that is the order, that is simile, something which is slightly more complex than a simile would be metaphor. And then if a metaphor or a simile appeals to one or more of your senses, it becomes an image. And then if it can be interpreted in different ways, if it can mean more than one thing, it is a symbol. See, that is the order. Simile, metaphor, image, and symbol. Now he says a poet can use a number of melodious lines, but that's not a great poem. It should have a splendid, a telling image in it. That's what Pound says. A telling image, a simile that appeals to you, that will convey the message of the entire poem. An image that is employed should convey the message of the entire poem. It throws a flood of light on the entire poem, and you understand it. That is how he puts it, and that is true. See, if you go through the poems of Avayar, in Sangam corpus, Avayar's poems, every poem of hers, I would consider her the greatest of Sangam poets, the greatest of women poets in the whole world. There is none else like her in Greece. In Greece, they will speak about a poetess called Sappho. But they are not. And English has a number of women poets, as you know, and American, Emily Dickinson. All these, can't hold a candle to our Avayar, because every poem of hers would have a splendid image. I will give examples later. Now, an image is more important than any number of melodious lines, according to this man, Ezra Pound. Unfortunately, he didn't know about Tamil poetry at all. Ezra Pound was familiar with Greek poetry, Latin poetry, Italian poetry. He was well versed in all those languages, West European languages. All of them he knew. And he was a professor of Romance languages. He lived in the 20th century. He was, T.S. Eliot considered him his guru, and he is dedicated the wasteland to Ezra Pound, and he calls him a faultless craftsman. A faultless craftsman. This Ezra Pound is called. His poems are not so great as his critical essays, Pound's essays. And yes, uh, he spoke about the importance of the image in a poem. As I said, he was not familiar with the Tamil poetry. Otherwise, he would have known about the real greatness of Tamil poetry, which is full of such images which he praises. Tolkappiyar's awareness of the prime importance of the poetic image is evident in his statements on what are called Iraichi and Ullurai. Now, Tolkappiyar speaks of, as I said, he doesn't speak about the other figures of speech at all, only about simile in his Uvamayal, and he doesn't consider it an important limb of a poem. He mentions 30 limbs of a poem, 30 உறுப்புகள், he says. In his செய்யுளியல், he says 30 செய்யுள் உறுப்புகள். Iraichi and Ullurai are included in that list, but not simile. Not simile. Because he felt even without similes, great poems can be written. That was his view. Iraichi and Ullurai, I will explain later. The Tolkappiyam Sangam tradition underlined the importance of visual images. While choosing his images, the poet is directed to keep in mind the character's status, the range and limits of its experiences and activities, and the objects with which it would be familiar. It is surprising to note that in addition to the striking similes, which remarkably serve the functions of illustration and ornamentation, the long-drawn epic similes, for which Homer and Milton have been long receiving high praise, are also to be found in the Sangam classics. That is, in addition to the similes, which serve the functions of ornamentation and illustration, you have got long drawn similes like those you get in Homer and Milton. Homer is known for his long drawn similes, which I will explain, but they are to be found in Tamil poetry too, especially in the poem called Paditruppattu about the 10 Chera kings. I have given a number of examples. There you can go through them later. An in-depth comparative study of these would demonstrate that the ancient Tamil poets were far ahead of their time in their understanding of the nature, function, and the potentiality of a simile, the power of a simile, the nature of a simile, the function of a simile, and the power of a simile. They were well acquainted with the Tamil poets and the Tamil critics, the distinguished commentators. When I say critics, Tamil critics, I don't refer to the modern Tamil critics or modern historians of Tamil literature. I'm referring to the ancient, commentators like Ilamboranar, and Senavarayar and Perasiriyar, Nachinarkiniyar, Parimel Alagar. Those people, were knew their theory of poetry, knew which is great poetry and which is not. It has been stressed now about Homeric simile, one or two examples. It has been stressed by Homer scholars that simile in Homer is not simply decoration but a dynamic invention. They say, they praise Homer so much. They say every simile used by Homer is a kind of invention. Besides simple similes, Homer employs similes that develop themselves. Now, object and simile, the simile would very often be a long one, a long drawn out one. That is, the subject may be mentioned in one or two lines, but the simile would be described in about 6 or 7 lines. It goes on and on. Besides the points of comparison, besides the similarities, There will be other details also, extraneous details, which Eliot calls, There would be other details also in the simile. They would go on and on, there won't be any one-to-one correspondence, that is what I mean. Between the object and the simile, there won't be any one-to-one correspondence. Our people speak of Yegadesa Uruvagam, and Mutru Uruvagam, Mutru Uvamai. That is, A is like B in certain respects. A is like B in only one respect. ஒரு கூறில் மட்டுமே ஒற்றுமையாகும் பொருளும் உவமையும். ஏதாவது ஒரு கூறு, he is like a bull அப்படின்னா, he is like a bull, he is as courageous as a bull, or he is as strong as a bull. That's all. The comparison ends there, with regard to strength, only one aspect, Otherwise, he doesn't resemble a bull, his physical appearance differs very much from that. So, Mutruamai, they call Yegadesa Urvagam, only one respect, one aspect. Mutruamai, in all respects, this corresponds to that. In such cases, but see, in Homer, that doesn't happen. Because he brings in a lot of irrelevant material, which has a beauty of its own. Beauty of its own. That's why those similes are praised. In the section known as Watching on the Walls of the Iliad, we come across two similes which are complete in themselves and which stop at A is like B and are not developed further in any direction. Describing the elders of the people who are sitting with Priam, the poet writes, this Priam was the king of Troy. I suppose some of you know the story of the Iliad, the description of the fight between the Greeks on the one hand and the Trojans on the other hand, the men of the soldiers of Troy. Troy ruled by this king Priam and his sons. Here, like our the father of Duryodhana, what is his name? Dhritarashtra. Like our Dhritarashtra, this Priam also had about 90 sons, if not 100, like Dhritarashtra. He had 90 sons, and he had a number of wives. And that man was ruling Troy. And one of his sons, one called, this, later I will mention the details. One of his sons, went to one of the Greek islands ruled by Agamemnon and stole the wife of Agamemnon's younger brother called Menelaus. So there was a fight between the Greeks and the Trojans in order to recover Helen. Helen was the one who was so abducted by this fellow called Paris. Paris was the name of the son of Priam. And so the fight between the two groups, and our poet Homer describes the fight between the Greeks, and which took a number of days, about 10 years. 10 years it took. During the 10th year, the real fight between the Greeks and the Romans, Greeks and the Trojans begins. That is described in about 24 long books by this blind poet. Homer was also blind, but Milton became blind when he was in his 40s. But this Homer might have been born blind. And yet he was, he had the poetic imagination, this power. And so he composed this. And this was an oral composition, Vaimoli Kavidai, oral composition, not a written one. Varaimoli Kavidai and Vaimoli Kavidai. Varaimoli Kapyam, Vaimoli Kapyam. The epics of Homer are known as Vaimoli Kapyangal because they were orally composed, on the spot composition. Whereas the epics of Milton, Virgil, and others were written by the poets themselves. In the case of Milton, It was his daughters who wrote. He would dictate and they would have to write which experience they didn't like at all. Now see this scene, watching on the walls. That is, Priam and his old companions, veterans, that is retired soldiers, they are all there, sitting on the walls. There is a huge wall around the city of Troy, which is protecting them, against the Greek army, which surrounds that wall. And there, sitting on the wall of Troy, Priam is witnessing this scene, that is the Trojan soldiers, the Greek soldiers, led by different kings like Agamemnon, Ulysses. Ulysses had brought his army from his country, Ithaca, and Agamemnon from Greece consisted of, even now, Greece consists of a number of islands, a number of small islands. That is what Greece is. And from all these Greek islands, soldiers had come, led by their kings, they are led by their rulers. They are all standing there. Priam is watching them from, sitting on the top of the wall. There is enough space for that on the wall. And he is, as I said, he is surrounded by his old companions who had fought with him in the earlier wars when Priam was young. Now he is considerably old. They are also old. And Helen is also there, the abducted queen. She is also there, weeping all the time. She is called Weeping Helen. The Homer is fond of using certain epithets. He would repeat them all the time. Windy Troy, he would say. Whenever he mentions Troy, that becomes easy in oral compositions. Repeating words, phrases, descriptions, they would all be repeated endlessly. That is what may annoy many of the readers. Such references, such repetitions in oral compositions, which couldn't be avoided. And such a description, Windy Troy, Weeping Helen. Weeping Helen may at times smile, but then the epithet would be there. Weeping Helen was smiling. Windy Troy. Wind words, whenever he refers to words, wind words, like that. And as speedy as wind, Mercury would be described as one who is as fast as the wind itself. The description would all the time be there. If it is done once or twice, it is okay. But all the time when Mercury is mentioned, this epithet would be there. Now, yes, they are watching the Greek soldiers, and he is asking Helen about the Greek chieftains, because Helen was there with her husband Menelaus, a Greek ruler. So she is able to identify them easily. This is Agamemnon, this is Ulysses, this is Nestor. Like that, she says, and these are the chieftains, and these are the characteristic features. She is giving all those details. Now Homer, it's a beautiful scene in Homer, this watching on the walls, and see the similes employed there by Homer. Simple similes. Now through old age, these fought no longer. These old fellows fought no longer, but they are veterans, had participated in a number of wars together with Priam. Yet were they excellent speakers, still they could speak even now as old people, Old people are known for their endless speeches, Remember. And now you are witnessing that. And clear as cicadas, which through the forest settle on trees to issue their delicate voice of singing. Cicadas are large insects, insects that make a loud noise. The speech of these old fellows, is compared to the noise made by those large insects. That is the comparison. While through the forest settle on trees to issue their delicate voice of singing, it is like singing. Such were they who sat on the tower, chief men of the Trojans. One simile, then another simile. There is a simple comparison between eloquent old speakers and singing cicadas, and no details about the latter that are not relevant to the comparison are given. In another passage, Priam compares Ulysses to a ram, to a sturdy ram, sheep. Truly, to some deep fleeced ram would I like him who makes his way through a lot of shining sheep flocks. Who is this fellow? He asks. And Helen says, he is Ulysses, this fellow, who is shorter than all the other rulers. He was very short, but very physically very strong and known for his cunning. Throughout, he through his cunning deeds and words, he could make a number of victories. And later he becomes the hero of Odysseus, Homer's Odyssey. Ulysses is the hero of Odyssey. Here he is one of the major characters. And so he is identified by Helen like this. He is compared to a ram simply. In the fourth book of the epic, there is a striking simile, direct from the experience of life, to describe Athene's successful attempt at brushing an arrow away from its mark. See how beautiful this simile is. This is used by, this is used to refer to the deed of one of the goddesses. The Greek gods and goddesses also take part in the war between the Trojans and the Greeks. And see the simile there. She brushes it away from his skin as lightly as when a mother brushes a fly away from her child who is lying in sweet sleep. That's a beautiful simile. That is, when Menelaus is struck by an arrow, by a Trojan soldier, this Greek ruler is struck by an arrow by a Trojan soldier. But this Athene is there. She is like a mother to Ulysses, and see how she protects him. How she protects him. She brushes it away. She brushes the arrow away from his skin as lightly as when a mother brushes a fly away from her child. When the child is being fed by the mother, supposing a fly troubles the child, she would, simply send it away, who is lying in sweet sleep like that. She did it like that, removed the arrow. The noise raised by an army is described through a simple, commonly used comparison. They rush to the assembly with such a noise as when a wave of the resounding sea roars on a wide beach and the ocean thunders. That is, the Greek soldiers are described like this. Again, a simple comparison. That is, the noise they made, the noise the Greek soldiers made is compared to the noise when the wave of the resounding sea, noise made by a stormy sea, noise made by a stormy sea, the noise made by the Greek soldiers. Simple comparison. Using an exquisite simile, Achilles gives expression to his own pathetic condition. That is also a beautiful simile, though a simple one. Achilles, see the simile. As a bird brings food in mouthfuls to her young ones when she can find it, yet she herself fares ill. So I watched through many sleepless nights and fought through many bloody days. That is, Achilles complains here. Achilles was with the Greek army. He was a great hero. Perhaps he is the hero of Homer's Iliad, He is the chief character, main character, protagonist of Homer's Iliad. And this man is fighting for the Greeks, And for some time, he refuses to fight for the Greeks and keeps himself away from the Greek army. And then he complains, I did so much for these fellows, for these ungrateful Greeks. He complains like that. And see the comparison. As a bird brings food in mouthfuls to her young ones when she can find it, yet she herself fares ill. That is, the bird, the mature bird with a number of young ones would wander all over the world, all over a long space in order to find some food for its young ones. She may not eat any of those when they are very rare, and the food material, food items are rare. She won't be able to take much, but she brings it from a faraway place in order to feed its young ones, which are there in its nest. Nest. Like that, he says, this fellow says, I fought like that for these ungrateful fellows, without taking proper care of myself. That's the comparison. But in the typical Homeric similes, there is a development of not the thing described, but that to which it is referred. In the 16th book, for instance, the Myrmidons would mean the Greek soldiers, one group of Greek soldiers, led by Patroclus, are compared to wasps. That's a beautiful, typical Homeric simile. The others are simple similes, but here is a typical Homeric simile. Yes. These soldiers are compared to, these Greek soldiers are compared to wasps. Wasp is our kulavi, like Theni. Theni bees, they produce honey, but wasps don't produce honey, and they sting like bees. These குளவி கொட்டுறது, குளவி கடுமையா கொட்டும் இல்ல, தேனி அவ்வளவு கடுமையா கொட்டாது. தேனியும் கொட்டும், ஆனா அவ்வளவு கடுமையா கொட்டாது. குளவி தேரல் மாதிரி கொட்டும். அது அதற்க என்ன சொல்றான் பாருங்க, இந்த கிரீக் சோல்ஜர்ஸ் தே ஆர் காம்பரபிள் டு வாஸ்ப்ஸ். அதோட நிறுத்தல, அந்த கொட்டுறதுல அதுக்கு குளவி மாதிரி இருந்தாங்கன்னு சொல்லிட்டு அந்த குளவியை பத்தி speaks at length about those wasps. See how he does it. Straightway they poured forth like wasps by the roadside, which boys habitually provoke, always taunting them. Wasps which have their homes by the road, thoughtless boys, they make a common evil for many people. Those wasps, if some traveler goes by and unwittingly disturbs them, summon up all their defensive spirit, and each one of them flies forth and fights in defense of his offspring. With heart and spirit like theirs, the Myrmidons poured themselves among the ships. They fought like wasps, but then the description is about wasps. See that next paragraph. The enraged soldiers are not compared to lions or tigers, but to provoked wasps, which are aggressive, scary, and wild. This comparison leads to a fascinating picture of the life of wasps. When travelers who pass by, give any trouble to the wasp, then all of them would fly out and sting them. The Iliad has many such similes which are based on familiar scenes of life and deal with the subjects remote from the heroic world, such as small boys beating donkeys. These are the long-drawn similes, mentioned in Homer's Iliad. Boys, see how simple they are, how they are taken from nature, real life situations, and then the long drawn out similes, that is the description of the object that is compared, that is brought in for comparison. Uvamayam, so many details about Uvamayam, not about, so many details about Uvamanam, not about Uvamayam. Then next comparison, you can leave that. There the gathering of soldiers is agitated like the waves of a sea raised by east and south winds. He starts describing the winds, that raise the floods in the sea. Later you can go through them. I have a number of similes like that. Perhaps this one is nice. The next one. A simple simile may be followed by a typical epic simile when needed. See this simile. But Patroclus stood beside Achilles, shepherd of the temple, shepherd of the people, shedding warm tears like a dark watered spring which pours its dusty waters over some sheer cliff. Seeing him swift-footed, godlike Achilles pitied him and spoke to him winged words. Another epithet which Homer likes, winged words. Why do you weep, Patroclus, like some little girl who runs beside her mother? See this comparison. You are Patroclus is his friend, Achilles' friend, and he has some complaint now here in this situation, and he is complaining to Achilles, and he is weeping, and he says, "Why do you weep like a small girl, who is accompanying her mother?" And then the description is about the young child accompanying her mother. Like some little girl who runs beside her mother, bids her take her up, take her up, and, refusing to walk the distance, asking the mother to take her up, clinging to her robe, hindering her as she would hurry on, and looking tearfully up at her until she takes her up. Like her, Patroclus, do you shed soft tears? You are weeping like that young girl. Why are you doing that? And let us leave the other similes, We have taken a lot of time for similes. And yeah, you can go through them later. Now about Milton's similes. Milton followed the example of Homer in the use of similes. Remember, Milton is indebted to a number of poets who wrote earlier, but all that suppressed by the English scholars who introduced Milton to us. We thought Milton is so great, so original with regard to so many things, but that is not the truth. First of all, he is indebted to a Portuguese poet, epic poet, who wrote 100 years earlier than Milton. 100 years earlier than Milton in Portuguese, in that language, and with Vasco da Gama as the hero of the epic. Vasco da Gama, who visited India, he is the hero of that epic, and he has introduced a number of innovations in the Portuguese epic to which Milton was highly indebted. But in the histories of English literature, such details won't be mentioned at all. And he borrowed a number of things from Homer, a number of things, including this kind of simile, this Homeric simile, long drawn out one. See this. But they are praised as though they were the original invention of Milton himself. Milton uses a number of epic similes, but Milton critics have drawn our attention to the astonishing complexity and variety of their logical forms. Distinguishing between the Shakespearean and the Miltonic simile, B. Rajan, one of our own critics, Rajan is supposed to be a great Milton critic. He's the only Indian who is praised like that, by the Westerners. Rajan states that in the former, A is like B in certain respects which are made clear, whereas in the latter, there is slender resemblance between the objects compared. Cleopatra, for instance, compares death with the lover's pinch which hurts and is desired. In Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare uses this simple simile. That is, Cleopatra herself says, the lover's pinch is something which hurts but is desired. The one serious charge leveled against Milton's similes is that the comparisons sometimes seem curiously thin, with only slender grounds of resemblance between tenor and vehicle. These terms also you should know. Tenor and vehicle, as I said, object and simile, upameyam, upamanam, upameyam and upamanam. And here, tenor and vehicle, another vehicle. Tenor and vehicle. Those are the terms used by the great in 20th century critic, I.A. Richards. I.A. Richards, in his philosophy of rhetoric, he has got a book called, he was a champion of the new criticism. This I.A. Richards was a great champion of what is in English called new criticism. And he, in his philosophy of rhetoric, in that book, he uses these terms to refer to object and the comparison, or the object that is that it is compared with. And tenor is upameyam, vehicle is a upamanam. Vehicle is a simile. And see, he says, comparisons sometimes seem curiously thin, with only slender grounds of resemblance between tenor and vehicle. There isn't much that is similar between the object and the simile. Christopher Ricks contends that Milton often uses similes with a clear sense of the fact that they don't fit exactly. He knows that there is no mutru uomai. It is not a mutru uomai. He knows that, but then he uses it purposely. That's what for the sake of the beauty and for the sake of the aesthetic delight that is provided by the comparison. James Waller defends them on the ground that they serve the four functions of illustration, ornamentation, aggrandizement, and prolepsis. What is this? He mentioned this. James Waller has written about the Miltonic simile. He has written a very good essay on the Milton, a book, full-length book on the Miltonic simile, and he brings in two more functions of a simile. In addition to illustration and ornamentation, they serve this purpose, that is aggrandizement and prolepsis. What do they mean? See there. To aggrandize someone means to make him or her seem richer or more powerful or more important than the person really is. That is exaggerated, comparisons, aggrandizement, highly exaggerated. That is, see, the fallen angels, when they are driven away from heaven by God, they fall. And they fall into a sea. And they are compared with the fallen leaves, the scattered leaves, the leaves that are thrown away by a wind, that are scattered by a wind, and which are floating on the surface of a sea. This is a case of aggrandizement, That is, such great angels, they were once very great, so these fallen angels. Such angels being compared to simply leaves, fallen leaves, leaves that had been withered away. And so that is aggrandizement, exaggeration. They may, and some warriors may be compared with, in an exaggerated manner. They are like lions, or tigers. Such comparisons, they are called to serve the purpose of aggrandizement, exaggerated accounts. It may be, about the greatness of a person or the smallness of a character, this aggrandizement. Prolepsis is another function which he mentions. That means foretelling the future. The simile itself foretells what is going to happen in the future. Such similes are proleptic. Prolepsis, proleptic. They foretell the future. What is going to happen in the future is mentioned there. For example, I will give a number of examples. Later, you can, I think it is getting late already. And later you can go through those similes. One example for this prolepsis. Now, yes, the biggest sea animal, sea beast, or the biggest living being is Leviathan. That is the whale. Whale is Timingalam. Whale is supposed to be the biggest thing, It's called Leviathan by Milton there, and that simile. Now, a whale is there in the sea. Perhaps it is asleep, or it is staying in a particular. Normally, it will be swimming across the sea all the time, but now it is there in a particular place, and some soldiers, shipwrecked soldiers, a ship is wrecked, and the warriors come out of the ship, they swim in the sea and reach this Leviathan, this sea beast. They mistake it for an island. It is so huge that they think that it is an island, a small island in the sea. And so they take shelter on the back of this Leviathan. And when the Leviathan starts moving, they will of course fall into the sea and perish. That's the comparison. Then there is a beautiful description of this sea beast, Leviathan, by Milton there. And remember, he doesn't stop there. He goes on. And this is a proleptic because the critics point out that this is a proleptic because Satan is like that Leviathan. That is mistaken as a refuge, as a shelter, as a firm support by Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, remember, Eve is first cheated by the devil in the appearance of a snake. He appears as a snake and deceives her and forces her to eat the fruits of the forbidden tree. And so she is deceived like that. And then Adam also starts eating the forbidden apple and then commits the sin. So he says this simile is proleptic because this Satan was mistaken for a support by Adam and Eve, but later proved to be treacherous, causing their fall. So this is proleptic, he says. Not very convincing, but this is an example of prolepsis, that particular function of a simile, foretelling the future. There is another long drawn out simile by Milton. There, our own alamaram, banyan tree, is taken for comparison. He gives a long description of the banyan tree. That is, he says, that is a tree from Malabar. In those days, Tamil Nadu was, the South India was referred to as Malabar, and Tamil itself was referred to as Malabar, and not Tamil or Tamil Nadu, or Tamilagam, but Malabar. It was referred to as Malabar, and he uses the word Malabar. There is a tree in Malabar, he says. There is a banyan tree, huge tree. And then how the roots of the banyan tree, the huge roots, and then the branches themselves taking deep roots into the mud, That a beautiful description is there. That is another example of Miltonic simile. Let us leave them there. You can go through the rest of the part. But finally, I come to, I suppose that it is, there is still time, or how much of time is there? The next lecture, 12. இப்போ முடிச்சிடலாம். சரி. Otherwise, I may go on, being an old man, a garrulous, talkative old man, I will go on endlessly. This, yes, these Tamil similes, and there I have described what are called Iraichi and Ullurai, by the Tamil critics. You can read those accounts of Ullurai and the Iraichi, how beautiful they are. From this Iraichi alone, the Sanskritists, Sanskrit critics and poets developed, as you know, their own theory of Dwani and Vakrokti, two things described by them. And you know about Dwani. Vakrokti is like our Giraichi. What does the Iraichi mean? That is describing something not directly but indirectly. Indirect descriptions. That is Iraichi. Irai means valaivu, something that is bent. Kukurai, is called Irai. Irai, that word is used. Irai Vanam in villages. You come across that. Like that, the Vakrokti means something that is bent, something that is not normal. Vakram, in Tamil we use the word Vakram. Vakra Buddhida avanuku. I mean, not straightforward or honest, something that is indirect, something that is bent. That is Vakrokti. That device is called Vakrokti by the Sanskrit critics. And Dwani, of course, you know. And this Dwani was derived from our Ullurai. And that Vakrokti was derived from our Iraichi. All those descriptions are there, explanations are there. You can go through them later. But finally, coming to the long-drawn simile in Tamil, I have given a number of examples, but draw your attention to only one thing. That is here, page number 25. I don't know. Towards the end of the paper, you see, there is a poem quoted from Ahananuru. The paragraph begins with, in what is called Suttu Ullurai. Are you able to identify that? In what that paragraph begins with, in what is called Suttu Ullurai, one thing is pointed at to yield a hidden sense. Who has been able to identify it? Page number, you tell. Huh? You tell them page number. Yeah, it is there. You are able to locate it? Is it there? That is, hail thee, O cloud. That is how the poem. You are able to locate it? Right. Now, see the poem. Hail thee, O cloud, would you scoop water from the sea, bend the dark vaulting welkin. Welkin means the sky above. Would you scoop water from the sea, bend the dark vaulting welkin, that is the sky, thunder like a war drum, and glitter like the sword unsheathed in a fight against foes formidable, by kings just and competent, only to end in sound and fury? Or would you save by rain the millet field millet field, guarded by the gypsy girl, moving gaily with her friends, wearing bengai flowers, densely lined with fire-like salai leaves, scaring parrots by sound and stone? See the explanation also I have given there. The heroine's girlfriend, Talaivi Tholi, remember in Sangam poems, these are the prominent characters. Talaivi Tholi, and then only Talaivan. The heroine's girlfriend, this is Tholi Kutru. This is what the Tholi says. The heroine's girlfriend asked the cloud if it is going to thunder in vain, or will save the millet cropped by raining. Is it going to end in simply sound and fury? She is addressing the cloud, Actually, she is speaking indirectly to the hero. Are you going to marry her, or are you going to desert her, are you going to leave the place, without marrying her? The heroine's girlfriend asked the cloud, see how beautifully it is done, Ask the cloud if it is going to thunder in vain and will have the save the millet crop by raining. The message is in fact meant for the hero, who is expected to say whether the slander uh, caused by his frequent visits will be allowed to continue, or whether he will put an end to it by marrying the lady. Though ostensibly an apostrophe to the cloud, it is addressed to the hero and hence falls within the category of Suttu Ullurai. But then there is this long drawn account, of the cloud. See, the cloud. See, the 3/4 of the poem are about the cloud, Hail thee, O cloud, would you scoop water from the sea, bend the dark vaulting welkin, thunder like a war drum, and glitter like the sword unsheathed. See the inner comparisons, so beautifully managed. Unsheathed in a fight against foes formidable by kings just and competent, only to end in sound and fury? Or would you save by rain the millet field, guarded by the gypsy girl, moving gaily with her friends, wearing vengai flowers, densely lined with fire-like silai leaves, scaring parrots by sound and stone? Those who are guarding the millet field, Tinaipunam Kapavargal, Tinaipunam, those who are guarding the Tinaipunam, these young girls, young ladies guarding them, they will, terrorize the birds that come there in order to send them away without eating the millet grains. So, are you going to marry her, or are you going to simply leave her? But the hero or the heroine or his deeds or her nature, they are not mentioned there, in the poem. Only the cloud and the address to the cloud and the complaint against the cloud. So such similes, there are plenty of them in Sangam poems, and I have quoted many at the end of the article, especially from Paditrupattu, one of the Sangam compositions. So later, when you are free, you can go through the entire paper, and then you will be able to understand the points stressed by me about the similes in Homer, Milton, and the Sangam poems. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for an wonderful session. It's a thought-provoking session. So, whenever you visit or whenever we listen to your talk, we remembers that we are also the students of literature and we have to read more, because at this age, he's still reading more and still writing. He's going to publish a book. So such a wonderful personality. So whenever he comes or visits our college, he motivates us. So being the student of literature, we should make him as a role model to read more, to expose more in the field of literature. Thank you so much for your. Actually, we are sorry. I feel sorry and sad to stop you because of this. Because, like Verso says, it's a spontaneous overflow of his thoughts. But we are due to forcefully. That's what we feel very sad, sir. So anyway, thank you so much for this wonderful session. I also thank each and everyone here present here for your patient listening. Thank you so much.